Daniel, I've got to admit that I'm a bit nervous-sided for today's guest. And that's a made-up word that
Yeah,
my daughter
definitely.
uses when she is nervous and excited at the same time. I've followed today's guest on LinkedIn for quite a while and really respect what she's done in the people space. And so, again, I'm a little nervous-sided, but I think we'll get through it today. So today, Katie, welcome to the Modern People Leader. How are you doing?
I'm excited and neurosighted too.
I'm gonna
Awesome.
start using that word. I like it.
Yeah,
Nervo-sided. Yeah. Our family adopted it once my oldest Astrid started using it. So Katie, every episode we start with a series of questions that we use to just get to know you a little bit better. And we end every episode with a series of questions that we call rapid fire. And our previous guest, Jill Larson, who is a chief people officer at PTC, chose you as the one person we needed to have on the show. So no
I think
pressure.
that is so nice. And I just want to say a huge thank you. It means a real lot to me. So thank you, Jill.
She spoke highly of the work you and your CEO. She shout out to Yamini, the great work you guys are doing at HubSpot, and specifically she referenced all the various ways that you guys are disrupting so many different areas of HR, which we're excited to talk about today.
I love that. Yamini is amazing, and we're so lucky to have her as our CEO. So happy to chat about her and anything else HubSpot related.
Well, first, we like to start each segment with what we call good news stories. And so we share a personal or work-related story, just a way of showing gratitude or just connecting. And so I'm going to kick things off. My good news is personal. My daughter, Astrid, the same one that provided me with the nervous-sided intro today, she put together her first graphic design this weekend. So she's 11 and she loves art and is taking graphic art in middle school. And we were just catching up and I was like, people do this for a job. Like they get paid to do this. And she was like, really? How awesome. And just immediately got her laptop and cranked out a logo for this little family project that we're working on. So that was really cool.
Go Astrid. That is amazing.
Maybe she can help us with the Modern People Leader brand refresh.
For sure. We could probably, and I don't know if we can afford her because I'm not sure she quite understands reasonable rates yet.
Okay, do you want me to go next or you want me to take it?
You go first. You go.
Okay. So we actually we took a few weeks off from doing any interviews. We wanted to give ourselves some time to recharge in the new year. So this is our first guest interview that we're doing in 2022 and or that we're recording in 2022 because we published one that we recorded in December, but This is the first one of the new year that we're recording. And I couldn't think of a better guest to have for our first episode or our first interview of this year. And I'm happy to get back into the swing of things.
Well, now I feel a lot of pressure to kick things off on a strong note. So that's great. I'm excited. Mine is professional. My team, as you might imagine, the start of the year for most people leaders is tough. You've got COVID continuing. You've got usually some sort of performance reviews around the corner, and then you support every team's kickoff in addition to having to hit Q1 hiring goals. And so my team put together something called Random Acts of Kindness, just for people operations folks to give shout outs for people who need it. And basically it's not performance related. So it's just anyone who needs a little TLC can get it. And our team is enabling it with personal touches. So people are getting postcards, nice notes, affirmations, a little food package, just little things that make a big difference. And I love those types of touches.
Wow, how awesome. That's awesome. Well, when I kick off these episodes, I like to start with, I've stole it from the Brené Brown playbook of, asking our guests what their story is. And in the context of the Modern People Leader, for us, that's really your career journey and everything that led to you becoming, well, I guess the cliff notes of what led to you becoming Chief People Officer at HubSpot.
Absolutely. So love that you stole this from Brene. I would say, just to add a bit of a personal touch before I talk about the professional side of things, I'm the oldest of 6 kids. And at one point there was a tweet last year that was like, the oldest kid who is the first to sleep and first up in the morning is a personality type and you work in HR. And all of those things are true about me. And so that's kind of me in a nutshell. I should have known I was going to go into HR at some point, but I had no idea. So I'm very much in the accidental modern people leader space. And I'm glad that that is a growing crowd. It was definitely a little isolating when I first started out, but like so many people. So first, when I was growing up, I wanted to be an astronaut. I went to space camp and space academy. Turns out I'm missing some very basic scientific skills that would be helpful to become an astronaut and get selected by NASA. And then I set my sights on another career that is quite common, which is the profession of law. I went to Bates College in Maine and I checked kind of every box. I was a good student, I was a good athlete, and like so many people, I had this like check, check, check list. Turns out I bombed the LSAT, didn't get into law school. So all those like neatly laid, perfect plans just didn't work out. That, of course, turned out to be a wonderful thing long term, but it felt devastating at the time. So I moved to DC anyways, thinking I would figure something out. I spent a year doing consulting and then spent 3 years working for a political consulting firm. The way I describe it to people is I wanted to be Olivia Pope before Olivia Pope existed. We were problem solvers, we had things handled, and we got to do really amazing crisis work. So that was where I got to really understand what I loved about crisis communications and marketing. While I was there, I moved with them to New York City. And when I was in New York, a bunch of women in my book club were applying for business school. I didn't know what business school was, but it sounded like fun. And they were a bunch of smart women I admired. So I applied for an MBA program and ended up going to MIT. After MIT, I joined an athletic training company called Athletes Performance, now Exos, and we were bringing elite athlete training to the masses via corporate wellness programming. Really awesome company and interesting journey there. But I joined them literally right after the economy tanked, which was obviously tough timing. And after spending my life on a plane to Phoenix to visit them very often, I decided I wanted to join a company where culture reigned supreme. And so I picked HubSpot for its culture. Not knowing I would end up overseeing that part of the business. And during my 9 years at HubSpot, I've worked in multiple marketing functions, ran communications for IPO, then ran culture, then took over all of HR. So happy to answer any and all questions, but not a conventional journey, but that is in a nutshell my leadership story.
Love it.
So
go ahead, Daniel.
Oh, no, okay. So I was listening to another podcast that you were on a few months ago, and you talked about how when you went to go get your MBA, one of the main reasons that you went was because you wanted to go into sports. And me being a huge sports fan, in my specific sport that I love is basketball. I'm just curious, like, what's your sport?
So I grew up in a hockey family. My dad was a sports lawyer and then worked in hockey when I was growing up. And so I grew up in Vancouver, then we moved to Connecticut, then back to Boston. For me, I was more interested in sports business. So I wasn't ever planning necessarily on going to work for a team, but I did want to do something marketing related for an org. And so one of the coolest things sports related that I ever got to work on was actually the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. It's still been a huge part of my career. I met my former boss and mentor who now runs the Craft Sports Group's analytics division, and Daryl Morey, who is obviously an incredible and MBA GM. But what's cool is working on the sports conference, you start to realize how many sports jobs are not directly X's and O's related. No one would hire me to coach a team, but I've been lucky enough to be in and around the sports world a fair amount since then. And so I entertained taking a job with Fenway Sports Management and a few other kind of surrounding companies and ended up deciding to go with Exos. But the reason I wanted to be in sports was the adrenaline, and turns out tech offers similar adrenaline without necessarily having to be up for game nights at all times. Working in sports, one thing I always caution people is it's amazing. I have a lot of friends who work in sports. Your life and your schedule is really not your own. And so I prefer being able to now be a fan and cheer on the world of sports and still stay connected to all my friends in sports, but to have more autonomy over my schedule and work in tech.
Love it. Love it. So tell us a little bit about the HubSpot business. Like if you were at a party and you had to give a quick response, how would you explain to people what HubSpot does?
Yeah, so at its core, HubSpot is a CRM company. And if someone at a cocktail party looks at me like, what the heck is a CRM company, which happens regularly, I'll often say, okay, if you were starting a business and wanted to make sure you manage your contacts and help them grow, and for example, solved customer service issues or tracked how much revenue you were getting from them, you'd need a system of record to do that that wasn't Excel or Google Sheets. We're the organization that can help mostly small and medium-sized businesses grow better. And so that's the easiest way to explain what HubSpot does. If someone is a business owner or entrepreneur, what I'll say is we got our start in marketing software that help people grow. And now we offer sales services and operations software that really helps your entire front office grow.
Love it. And how many people work at HubSpot?
So we have 5,500 people
5,500?
globally
Okay.
now. Yeah.
And how many people are on the people team?
There are about 320 people on the people operations team.
Wow. It's a big team. Nice.
It is.
Cool. Well, I was doing a little bit of research prior to this conversation, and I saw that HubSpot was voted as a top 3 best places to work on Glassdoor and as the #1 culture on Comparably's 2021 list. So first of all, congrats. That's
Thank
super
you so
awesome.
much.
And I was reading one of your LinkedIn posts recently, and you talked about how culture continues being the reason that people choose to stay and grow with HubSpot. So I'm curious, what is it like to be a HubSpot employee, and why should Steven and I be jealous that you get to work there?
So first, thank you. I'm super proud of my team. So really excited about that. But the reason you and Steven should be jealous that I work at HubSpot is we have a great sense of purpose. So I just talked about helping millions of organizations grow better. Our customers and partners are amazing, and our mission is really inspiring. That all sounds great, but what I love the most is that we have a sense of humor while doing it. So, as an example, one of our longstanding employees posted the other day, it was her birthday, and she was like, the biggest award and present that I got was this present. And it was a picture of a fake award that was created for bad naming conventions for software. And like they stood up in front of the entire product team and gave her an award for it. And I told her that I might tell that story on this podcast. And I was like, I was looking for a quirky story to describe how kind of quirky and different and personal it feels to work at HubSpot. And she's like, oh, yeah, absolutely. Tell them it's great. And so what I always come back to is like a lot of companies have a really strong mission, frankly, a really compelling mission. Very few organizations match that with a really compelling culture and with the fact that you can work with really nice people who also happen to be really funny. And so the way I think about it is Brian Halligan, one of our co-founders, used to always say he measured some of our success at HubSpot by the like belly laughs per minute or belly laughs per week. I still think of that as an important metric at HubSpot. And 9 years later, I'm still laughing. Not too much. I take my work very seriously, but I don't ever take myself too seriously. And I think that's an important trait of HubSpotters.
I 100% agree. At the company I work for, Humu, we are actually about to raise a Series C. Hasn't been announced yet, but I think next week it will be. So I think it's okay for me to say this. But we're having a company-wide meeting / celebration where everyone brings their favorite food that starts with a C. And we always do like quirky little things. So when you were talking about this fake award, it just reminded me of all of these quirky, goofy, weird things that our company does. And I do really think that it makes a huge difference. And, when I was working with Steven at Workify years ago, I mean, the amount of inside jokes, I can't even like begin with like, telling you how many there were. There were so many that just popped up every week.
I just love that. And don't you want to work with people where they can actually put their guard down and be themselves? And
Exactly.
I love that someone is going to bring like corn chips, and then someone's going to bring like this amazing family recipe that their aunt has been making for generations. I like that combination. The event where this woman won this award are now CISO, who's also a senior leader in our engineering team. He said for this award that he was going to get up there dressed in a full tux and make up a song. And to be clear, this man has many talents. Singing is not one of them. And you're hearing about this and you're just like, this guy, they're going to boo him off. Like, this is not going to go well. And how do you give someone feedback? He gets committed. He rented the tux. Like, this is happening.
Yeah.
And the show must go on. And the next day, people were like, you have no idea what happened last night. It was the best night of my life. It was amazing. It was weird. It was wonderful. I think the best work experiences are both weird and wonderful.
That's going to have to be like a quote that we pull out of this episode. Weird and wonderful. I like it. So you've been at HubSpot for about 9 years now. What is the evolution of the HubSpot culture look like over the last 9 years? Has
So
it
I think that
changed?
things that have stayed the same are transparency and autonomy. Those two values really have not changed since I got to HubSpot. And the reason for that is twofold. Transparency, I think our founders have always believed in the Louis Brandeis quote that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I truly think that that has stayed as important as we grow. Autonomy, I have always worked for two co-founders who legitimately hate being micromanaged and believe that the best people in the world have never woken up in the morning and been like, I can't wait for someone to tell me exactly what to do and how to do it. And I, by the way, believe in their thesis and think that has remained incredibly accurate, particularly in this current talent market we're in right now. The things that have changed and evolved, we changed one of our values a few years ago, and the E used to stand for effective, and now it stands for empathetic. I think we had to do that. And the reason for that is as you're expanding globally, time zones are hard. Global growth is hard. Entering new markets is hard. It never goes exactly as you had hoped. You need to make sure that you're emphasizing empathy and how you collaborate. And so I think that was a really positive addition to our culture. The second thing is we've gone from a mostly office culture with 10% remote folks to now a truly hybrid culture. And like so many organizations, we're trying to figure out exactly what that means and how to do it. And we're not perfect at it yet. But I would say that's been a big part of things. If you were to see our company meeting, it used to be all of us handing off a physical microphone. I can't think of the last time we were all in the same space conveying a message. And so that has been a fundamental change. And then the other thing I will say is I think one potential learning for HubSpot was we had a really strong culture when we first started, so much so that all of our leaders were homegrown. And I think now we have a really nice balance of we promote a lot of people internally. There are myriad opportunities for people to grow and get promoted internally. And then we brought in folks like Yamini, like Steph Cuthbertson, who's our new chief product officer. We've brought in some great external leaders. We've found that magic balance between growing people internally and welcoming external leaders. And I think one disadvantage of a company that has a strong culture early on is it can almost be like organ rejection, because someone coming in has very little chance of succeeding. And so I think one really good evolution in our culture is we now combine the best of internal growth with being able to recruit external leaders who succeed and thrive here.
So we recently had Darren Murph on the podcast, and he's the head of remote at GitLab. And one of the great quotes that came out of that podcast was the pandemic I can't remember what it didn't damage already good cultures. It revealed the companies that didn't have a good culture to begin with. So, for the HR leaders out there that maybe recognize that their culture isn't where they want it to be, is there any advice that you have for them on what they can do?
Yeah, so I love Darren and have a ton of respect for what he does. He and I are lucky enough to cross paths from time to time on this stuff, and I just think the world of him. I find that a lot of HR leaders are struggling trying to get business leaders on board with where the future of work actually is. So as an example, I think a lot of people thought this year we're coming out of a pandemic, we'll get everyone back to the office and it'll be great and life will be easier. And what we are seeing over and over again is even folks who live within a mile of the office have just gotten really comfortable with being more productive at home. And so they want to come into the office from time to time, but many of them will not. And so relying on that as a crutch, I think, is a mistake. And so I would say if there are folks for whom you're thinking our culture isn't working, I always go back to what are the basics? Who are you telling people you are? How do you deliver on that promise? And where are your employees saying that you fall short of that promise? Being a great modern people leader is just being a great product manager for your employee experience. And so what it comes down to is, what are you selling that candidates are buying, and how well do you live up to that vision? Everything else is just filling in the gaps between those two things.
Wow. Yeah, there are going to be a lot of great quotes from this conversation. But I just to sit and dig in this one a little bit. for those, I think I agree with you. There are a lot of leaders that are struggling, HR practitioners, people leaders, to get their colleagues at the leadership level, executive level, on board with like examining like who we are and how things have changed over time. Like what advice do you have for them in those struggles in terms of getting people, because it's hard, especially if you're co-founders or people that have been involved with the business from very, very early on. I mean, you said it yourself, like the pro of having a founder involved, or a long tenured CEO or executive, is there's, you hang on to all, a lot of the great cultural things that have made the company successful, and thrive. The downside is it can create blind spots when it's time to evolve from what you've had in the past. And so just curious, do you have any advice?
I'll tell you what we did, because actually Darren was a part of it. What I find as it relates to future work is people are very tied to their own personal experiences. So our founders were actually very willing to rewrite or recreate the wheel. I actually think it's hardest for people who run big teams, because all they're thinking about is, okay, how are my managers going to function? How are my directors going to scale? How are we going to help frontline sales reps or new engineers succeed? And so what we did was, if you are a people leader and you're coming up against business leaders on a topic, you never want it to become your opinion versus their opinion, because you will inevitably lose, especially on long-term strategy. And so what I try and do is take the personalization out of it. You never want it to be Katie thinks this, Stephen thinks this. What I always say is like, let's roll the tape on this. And so what we actually did when we were making the decision on our future work plans, I had a vision for what we should do, but I didn't want it to be my vision. So what we did was put together 4 panels, and actually Darren was one of the panelists. And the panels included recent college graduates and people who worked in career services at universities. So if we say we care about top talent, let's hear directly. Let's not speculate on what college students want. Let's actually hear right from them. Let's hear from people in career services, and let's hear from top CS professors on where they would advise their students to go and learn. So that was one panel. One panel was on work experts. So people, including Darren, was on that panel, just talking about how work was changing. And they, as you might imagine, brought some really good data and perspective. Third was compensation and benefits experts. We brought in people from other companies, not from HubSpot, to give us feedback. And then the fourth was more senior experienced candidates, so giving us feedback. Final thing we did was actually brought in some leaders on diversity and inclusion and belonging to talk about how leaving the decision in the hands of managers or teams or locations actually would create things like proximity bias, recency bias, and some bias against folks. As you might imagine, there are a lot of women of color, people who are disabled, who don't want to go back to the future of work as it was. And what doing those panels allowed us to do was take it away from you and I disagreeing on specific opinions to what do people actually want, and how do we get some real feedback on what the future looks like. And I highly recommend it for almost any problem you're trying to solve. We go back to, okay, listen to our employees, understand what the core challenge is, and then let's figure out where the puck is going. And that was our objective in listening to those panels. And by the time the panels were over, it was super clear that our assumptions around what college students wanted or what experienced candidates wanted were wrong and were changing. And they were super helpful in galvanizing us as a leadership team and making it really clear what we needed to do.
And did you guys do this as part of like leadership, like offsite meetings, that sort of thing? Or how did you create the forum for these panel discussions?
We actually just did it as, we basically said, we're going to develop a vision for the future of work. And unlike a bunch of companies which were doing reactive plans and saying we're going to create bridge programs for 6 months, we were like, we're doing a long-term strategy here. Emer, who's our global head of culture, worked together with our team to put them, she kind of spearheaded the effort for our team. And basically what we said to all of our management team was, you can come to these or you can skip them, but the plan will be formulated using these as input. So we recommend that you be there. And our co-founders were avid participants. They were listening, they were taking notes, they were asking questions. And so as you might imagine, that certainly helped with attendance. We also got creative with who we asked to be there. We did some skip levels. So we wanted to make sure that sales managers or engineering leads weren't left out of the conversation. We included them so that they could hear firsthand some of the feedback. And once we did that, the answer was pretty clear. But I think what we were clear on is you don't have to come, but this is where the opinions and inputs are going to happen. And that drove attendance. And then the other thing is you got to rely on influential people in your org. So having our co-founders there asking questions and being open-minded themselves certainly set a strong tone for other people.
Yeah, I could see how the culture carriers being involved and being active participants would quickly bring others on board in the process.
Absolutely.
So that's awesome. Well, similar to that question, I do want to ask and dig into some of the things that Jill alluded to in our last podcast. So, what are some of the things that you are excited about that your people team is currently working on, things that you're proud of? Can you share a little bit more, other initiatives you have going on?
Yeah, so one thing, our people analytics team is doing some really interesting work. I think when everyone's talking about the Great Resignation, there's this assumption that it's just about compensation and title. And our people analytics team has created some really compelling research that it's personal connection to the work and perception of your own personal career growth. And so how relevant does HubSpot's growth feel to my ability to continue to grow and evolve in my career here? And so what I love about our people analytics team is they're driving insights that meaningfully drive retention. And then they're also thinking about some of our future state problems. So looking at things like strong versus loose connections, using metadata in Slack, and really kind of thinking through what that looks like for us. And so our people analytics team's work, I am super excited about. On the DI&B side of things, I'm super excited. Our team has developed a program of stay interviews to help us specifically retain BIPOC Manager Plus folks on our team. And I'm really excited with how that's been turning out and how that's shaped up. And then the other thing is, I think senior women in Director Plus role, I suspect when the Great Resignation is over, they are going to end up being one of the most mobile groups. I think they're electing to walk out the door at many companies where they don't see career growth. And so we're doing a really amazing cohort-based program to help them build both community, but also help them grow in their career. So those are just a few of the things that my team is doing and working on that I'm really excited about.
On the people analytics work, this is something that's near and dear to me. Can you share a little bit more on some of the insights that you guys are gaining, or is it still too early in terms of the key drivers of retention?
So I think, honestly, I led with the headline, which is I think there's this massive push around compensation. And don't get me wrong, fair and equitable compensation is incredibly important. But the personal connection to work is something that every director and manager can have an impact on. So one of the things we're working on with our Director Plus community is just making sure that that message is clear to all of them and they feel empowered for what that actually looks like. So what that means to me in practice is it's one thing to show our mission on the board, and it's one thing to show how many internal promotions there are. It's another to be able to say, Stephen, I understand that your lifelong dream has been here, you're here. We went through your last performance reviews. Just help me understand what crazy success would look like in your mind. What would the best next year look like? What's a stretch opportunity you've always wanted to have that potentially I could wave a magic wand and make happen? Who's an external leader you've always wanted an intro to that perhaps I could set up some time for us so you could pick their brain and get coffee? I think sometimes we think too narrowly about you can take this course or you can do this. I think we need to open up possibilities. And so I think our analytics team is doing a really nice job driving those conversations and opening them up. I think the other thing our people analytics team is doing is finding important inflection points in people's tenure that really matter. So it turns out a day and a week do not equal in year one, do not equal a day and a week in year 2 or 3. And so identifying those inflection points so that managers have a physical reminder to check in with people, I think is super helpful. Managers are really busy. I have a lot of empathy for people managers and directors. You've got a lot going on. So getting a little nudge, I think, is helpful. And I think those behavioral nudges are so critical and so important. And I'm excited with how our people analytics team is partnering with our core HR team to make them more accessible to managers so they have to think less and can just act more.
Love it. Love it. One of the things you mentioned in the prep work leading up to this session was around the strong hybrid operating system you guys have designed, where new hires can pick essentially which option they want. And in my mind, it seems almost like enrolling in my benefits. Like I can choose like once a year, I can choose like which option I want to go with. Can you share with us a little bit about that? And what really reminded me to come back to this was your comment about managers and everything that's being put on their shoulders. So tell us a little bit about this, hybrid operating system and how you've helped your managers like support and know how to kind of flex with this kind of system.
So you nailed the analogy. It's exactly like open enrollment. When you start at HubSpot, you pick your benefits plan once a year. You have an opportunity. And by the way, if there's a life event in the middle, you're allowed to re-elect or change those benefits. That's exactly how we treat the future of work plan here. The reason and logic behind it was had a few elements. One, we saw a lot of companies saying they were going to leave it up to managers to decide if people could be remote or not. And I think that has a tendency to bias for folks who have been in the office at any given point, familiarity or kind of friendliness, proximity, but also just folks who look, sound, act, went to similar schools as you did. And so I felt very strongly that if we were going to do this and pick this route, we needed to make sure it wasn't something that always had to cross someone's desk to get approved. We were going to be hybrid by default. And so I'm proud of us for having the courage to make that hard call at the start, because I ultimately think it's going to make HubSpot a more diverse and inclusive company. The second thing, though, was if we wanted to do it and do it well, we had to automate it. And so it was a huge effort between our strategic projects team and our HRS team to make sure that we actually integrated all of our systems across the board. So the thing that you pick becomes the thing you do, becomes the stipend you get, and also is clear to your manager so that there's no surprises on you being at home, at Flex, or at office. And so I think one of the things we did was really making it clear to our managers that even though they didn't get the choice, they get the choice when they're posting a role. They don't get the choice after they meet the candidate. So said differently, you can pick a role. As an example, our security team or our front desk team has to be in the front office. And so as a result, those are listed as at office. But you don't get to change your mind based on saying, like, Steven has a lot of experience, I'm going to let him do it, so that's going to work. It has to be based on the true role and business need. And so one thing I think that did right from the start for our managers was set the tone to go, okay, I am going to be part of a hybrid culture. I'm going to have team members that pick every different option here. And so I need to fundamentally change the way I operate to address that. And we're just now starting to figure out all the tools we need to help enable that. But one of the things we did was put together a series that was self-paced to help managers change their way of operating. So as an example, if you had a team huddle and you used to rely on the drive-by to check in on people and their moods, probably can't do that anymore. So how can you do a quick Zoom check-in? 1 to 10, how you feeling? If you had to pick an emoji to describe in Slack to describe how you're feeling today, just those async ways of checking in with people, we're giving people more toolkits. One of the things we're also honest with people though about is we don't have all the answers. So we're actually making it more clear that we need our managers to share best practices with each other and with the whole company. Because I truly think anyone who says we have this all figured out, we've got this nailed, is full of it. Everyone is figuring this out. So all we're doing with our managers is just helping them enter the learning lab alongside us.
I love the idea of automating it. Not only are you giving the individual the choice to choose how they want to work at the beginning of every year, but also now that you have it tracked in your systems, you can track, employee engagement, in office versus fully remote versus flex, and you can figure out what you need to improve it with each experience. So I think that's a really smart way of approaching it. And I think
it really holds us accountable with what's working and what isn't. So as an example, to your exact point, we can track intent to stay, we can track attrition, we can track NPS, we can track their inclusion and belonging scores, and those are all really meaningful. Turns out right now, we have challenges, not surprisingly, with folks hired during the pandemic who have never met a HubSpot colleague. Turns out you like HubSpot better when you've met another HubSpotter in real life, which I think is arguably a really good thing. And then the second thing is some folks who are at office who I think we're hoping this year would be different and who wasn't. And so I think that is totally fair. And they're sharing like, hey, I just want to plan on a roadmap for how we get the office back to exciting at some point. It's okay if it's not next week. I think that is totally fair feedback. And I'm glad we have the clear data sets now so we can act on people's feedback.
And as far as, the operationalizing of an approach like this, are there any automating was obviously, and I agree, like once you make that investment up front, like everything downstream becomes a lot easier to manage, or at least you in probably isn't straight through automation through, all the processes, but at least you have that fundamental core kind of automated. Were there any other challenges that you guys had in terms of operationalizing this employee-driven approach?
I think anytime you automate something, there's always challenges that go in it, right? One was just getting our employees and managers to understand the why people couldn't change every month. So to really understand the logic of, hey, if we pick this route, the benefit is you get a ton of autonomy. The downside is you can't change it every single week and self-select in or out. It's not a good use of our team's resources on the back end. The second thing was getting directors comfortable with the fact that it was ultimately worth it for them because of the talent we were going to get as a result of these investments. And then the third thing was we had to figure out, just operating from a very practical perspective, things like IT at home setup, stipends to support remote work. Those differ and the laws differ by market. And so as you might imagine, spending a ton of time with our finance and legal team, going through every detail to make sure we were compliant in addition to being fair with what resources we set up. So as an example, how everyone at this point gets a setup for their office, because we assume at home that someone's going to be working at home no matter what, but the stipends differ regardless of, or based on which work preference you choose. Then there are some things that we basically said to employees, if I go into the office and I get Mike and Ike's, which were my regular snack when we were in the office, don't judge me, I don't want to ever go to my boss Yamini and say like, well, Stephen got 3 more Mike and Ike's because he's been in the office more than I have. That doesn't meet our value of empathy and autonomy and transparency. And so part of what we also said to people is we are really putting a lot of effort into be fair and thoughtful and transparent. You can view what everyone is getting on each stipend very clearly. It's super transparent. We also don't want to be a company where you're keeping score constantly. And so if you're keeping an eye on like, well, they don't have to commute in the office, and so you should pay for more commuting, it doesn't represent our value of empathy. And so part of it was just also getting employees used to the fact that picking a lane means that on some given months or days, our ad office employees are getting a few more cupcakes in the office that you don't get, but you don't have to pay the commuting day-to-day bills or sit in traffic. And those things and trade-offs are part of the deal.
Yeah, I think that part of the reason why companies are still like 2 years later, I can't remember what episode it was, but we had Dina Upton from Drift, and she was like the very first person that came on and was like, you got to lean in. You got to like, there are a lot of different ways to do this, but you got to lean in and create some clarity for your employees. And she was the first person who was really advocating for the equity and the equitable part of this, hybrid arrangements in terms of like their DEIB strategy. And so I believe that so many companies are still like dragging their feet or struggling with this because of some of these issues that you're talking about. Like, how do we make it fair? And I agree that it's not going to be perfect for everyone, but if you can create transparency and show people like these are like, depending on what package you choose, here's what's included, and you're making the decision. You can choose any of these packages, but this is how they're structured. I think that helps get over some of the concerns or risk of like, let's make a deal. And there will be employees that are never going to be happy with whatever arrangement it is, and they're going to find some little detail or nuance to harp on. And I love this structure because it makes it really easy to manage, and it is really puts the onus and accountability on the employee to choose whatever they want. But if you choose this is what you're going to get, and it is what it is. So absolutely. I think that's so awesome. I also wanted to quickly go back to a comment you made earlier, in terms of like leaning into this strategy and it being a comparative advantage in the future. I think that I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I also think, coming back to the last project that you mentioned around investing in your Director Plus community, senior women programming, et cetera, that's going to be one of the ways I believe that you will retain women when we think about all the responsibilities that women have, how they were impacted by the pandemic, in terms of like choosing to leave work because they had to, if they had others to take care of. And so I just I think there's a lot. I am kudos on all the how much thought was put in and how all of these details tie into one another, because I think, to me, that's how you get to the best in class culture. It is, it's through this intentional, and I think Darren Murph was the one that was like, that was his word for the year, is intentionality. So love to hear how
I love that
intentional you
word, and
guys
I
have been.
really do think that that's what it takes. And I think when people will talk about DI and B in isolation, and then they'll talk about the future of work. To me, the reason so many women and women of color are leaving the workforce is that the old way of working never worked for them. So their interest in going back to it is zero. And I think many workplaces are failing to see that connection between those two things. And our objective from the very start with our future work strategy was to make it absolutely clear that your zip code where you live should not determine your career growth, and that your work preference should have no impact on the level you can reach within our organization. And I think we sent a strong message from the start there that yes, the stipends part of it was painful, the automation part of it was painful, but we're seeing it now in the retention of those key underrepresented groups that really matter to our long-term success.
Love it.
Me too. So Katie, you've talked about how your tenure as the chief people officer has, from the outside looked like this huge success, but that, like everybody else, you've failed a good amount of times during your tenure. So I'm curious, is there one failure that immediately comes to mind for you that completely shifted your perspective?
There are about 10 that come to mind, but I'll share one that I think may be helpful. When I was appointed as our chief people officer, I was our first female C-level executive, which now is hard to believe because we have 4 and, an amazing CEO in Yamini. But I was projecting all kinds of confidence, and inside I just felt this huge backpack of pressure. I felt a ton of pressure to succeed. It was a new role for me. I was someone who had switched into HR, and so I felt really unequipped for the role. And so I would say when you're not feeling completely secure in yourself, you have a tendency to overcompensate. So a few of the failures I made in my first few years. One was I talked too much. 2 was I said yes to everything. I felt like if I were there for everybody and did every speaking gig and met with every employee, that would be the best thing I could possibly do for HubSpot. And what it left me as was a pretty depleted leader who didn't spend enough time on my operating system as a team. And so the lesson, I think, is when you take over a new role, the feedback I would give any leader I was supporting, like I did for Yamini during the CEO transition, is you need an operating system that works. And so the thing I would have done was you have to treat your people team as your A team. You need to make sure you have a leadership team cadence and meeting, clear objectives, a clear strategy for the year on how to win, clear mechanisms for people to give you feedback. And if I were to go back to the beginning of my tenure, I would have cleared my calendar, spent a full week developing that operating system, said no to way more things so I could have more energy to coach and focus on growing my team. And I would have listened more than I talked. So that is a big one. Since then, I've made approximately 1,000 additional mistakes that I'm happy to go through. But that's the one that really sticks out as I really spent a full year chasing something that wasn't attainable without saying no intentionally more to a ton of requests.
Yeah, that's so relatable. I find myself doing the same things, but I'm working on it.
I think that's true of any manager role, any new role that you're stepping into. You think your job is to be everything to everyone, and really your job is to help the people on your team succeed and grow, and an operating system that doesn't thrive on burnout, and you have to set the tone.
Yeah, I've got the double whammy of also being a people pleaser. Like that's just part of my personality makeup. And when I realize like 2 things: A, there are people that will keep asking and asking and asking until you say no. I was like, wow, like that's a thing. And then the second part was, when you do say no, a healthy person will respect that and will understand. And that was like the other thing that I had to kind of rewire my understanding in my head, because I've made that mistake before as well.
I'm a people pleaser. And then the other thing I think no one wants to talk about is because there are so few women in the C-suite, you get asked to do a lot of stuff, whether it's mentoring, speaking gigs, sponsorship, all very worthy things. And by the way, I care deeply. It is a cause that I care so much about. And I think what you said, Stephen, is really important, which is I had to learn that it was not only okay to do it, but that the people I cared most about, if I said, no, this doesn't work for me, would understand and embrace it. And those that don't, continue asking. And so part of what I really try and do is say no loudly internally on things so that other female leaders and also other leaders throughout the company know it's okay to push back and set boundaries that work for them.
So I think this is a perfect segue into our rapid fire questions.
Great.
All right, first question. If you could go back in time and talk to 22-year-old Katie, what career-related advice would you give yourself and why?
I would say run your own race. So I think I was very obsessed when I was 22. I thought you hit milestones. I thought everything worked on a timer, personal, professional. I was so worried. I, didn't have a boyfriend, didn't have this apartment, didn't know where I was going to visit, like all these different things. And I just think I thought success was a destination where you went and I wasn't moving fast enough to get there. And I think I would tell her, it's all going to work out just fine, and maybe take a deep breath once in a while.
Yeah, love it. All right. If you could fix any HR or people problem with the magic wand, what would it be and why?
I think I'm going to pick a spicy one for this today, if it's okay. It would be erasing entitlement. So I have a lot of room for feedback. I love feedback. I love it when employees give me tough feedback. I think the line between feedback and entitlement is really hard. I have all the time in the world for people who come and give us feedback on things we could do better, differently. I think entitlement is a really hard thing. And I don't have a ton of patience for people who treat my team, our facilities team, our IT team, wait staff, you name it, with a level of entitlement. And so if I were to erase anything, great feedback, I would keep in spades. I would make it really clear that entitlement, that we're erasing that as part of the equation.
I can get behind that.
Cool.
So
purely for my daughters alone, I would like entitlement to be erased, please.
And I think it's hard. One of the things I did an Instagram takeover for our HubSpot Life channels the other day, and someone said, is your culture as great as everyone says it is? And what I said to someone is yes and no. Yes, for all the reasons we've talked about, it's wonderful, it's fun, it's engaging. And it's work. I still have tough days. I don't get everything I want. I get let down. I get disappointed. I get frustrated with people. There's conflict. And I think we've lost a little bit of piece of that where we view work as having to be perfection. If everything's not unicorn and rainbows all the time, that's a problem. And I think we got to work our way out of it. I think conflict and struggle and learning and growth is how all of us evolve as humans. And I think there needs to be a little embracing of that versus always taking the easy way out or expecting people to fix things for you.
Yeah, it's a part of the journey. So something that I think you briefly talked about in one of your recent interviews was that in the past year and a half, something that you've, had to do more of is keep an eye on what's coming around the corner. So I'm curious, when you look around the corner for 2022, what do you see coming for the future of work?
I think what's coming for the future work is a little less focus on the office as the center of gravity. And so I think there's going to be a ton of innovation around connectivity, but it's not going to be all around the office. So last year it was all about we're going to redesign the office so it works for X. I think there's going to be a little bit more here's how we build meaningful connections and really enjoy each other's company, but without the office always being the epicenter of everything. So I think that's a big one. I also think we're going to see different working arrangements outside of where people work. So as an example, I think when people work is going to become a newer innovation and discussion, not just 4-day work week, but also people who choose to work different shifts that become more of a norm. I think there will be fewer people working 9 to 5. And I don't just mean 10 to 6. I mean, in meaningfully different ways that work for their family lives and for their travel schedules and their passions outside of work.
All right. Last rapid fire question. Who should we bring onto the show next?
You should bring on Mita Malik. She is the head of diversity at Carta. She is a former marketer as well, so I have a little bit of bias there. But I met her at a conference, I think 5 years ago now, and she is just a light. She is someone who I think brings great perspective. She used to be at Unilever. She's got a really strong social justice bent for things, how things should be. And then she's also got a really creative marketing mind. And then, of course, she's focused on all things inclusion at an awesome tech company. So you should bring me down.
All right. We will definitely reach out to her. So we end every episode with a one word or phrase close. So could be anything that I guess expresses the sentiment that you have leaving this show, or it could be silly or whatever you want. I usually go first so I could so that nobody steals mine.
Great.
So I'm gonna keep that going. Weird and wonderful.
I like it. Mine is joy. All of our talk of what I'm going to say no to has brought me back to one of my intentions for the year, which is like less time in the drudges of work and more time creating joy. And this has been a joyful experience. So mine's joy.
Oh, thanks. Mine is I'm very grateful you guys didn't take it because I thought someone would. My one phrase will be less entitlement. And I'm going to throw a bonus in here because I am not a Humu employee, so I will not be bringing my seafood if that does in fact happen. But the first thing that popped in my mind was cookies. And I would have brought a plate, charcuterie board, platter of different cookies. That would have been my bring. So
I have to ask them, chocolate chip cookies, what's your favorite? Are you like a soft, give me the lay of the land here.
I am not a chewy cookie guy. I'm a crunchy cookie.
I thought I liked you, but I don't.
Oh, no.
Yeah, come on, Steven.
They get I like dipping cookies in coffee, and the chewy ones, they just fall into the coffee, and it's a bad thing. And I'm an Oreo. That's if I choose one cookie, I'm a huge Oreo cookie fan.
It makes sense given that if you're a hard cookie person, Oreos would of course be your go-to. It makes sense. You're solving for the dipping. I get it.
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm outnumbered here. Chewy cookie to
I think if we took
cookie.
a poll of most people, you'd be on the losing end of this one.
I absolutely agree. I think
I respectfully disagree with you guys, but if we have, maybe we need to start a LinkedIn quick poll about this.
Yeah, I think we need a poll for this because I feel very confident in our
Me too.
Well, thank you so much, Katie, for joining us today. It was everything that we were hoping it would be. You shared so much insight, so many great things that you guys are doing at HubSpot. And hopefully every now and then we like to bring guests back to do group discussions. And so if you're into that and you'd be open to that, we would love to bring you back in any capacity in the future. So thanks again for joining us.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Katie. Bye.
Bye.